All right, I'd like to call to order the special meeting for Tuesday, January 9th, 2018. Can I have roll call, please?
Mrs. Melendi?
Here.
Mr. Gentry?
Here.
Mr. Drizel?
Here.
Mr. Guerin?
Here.
Mr. Troy?
Here.
Mr. Fleck?
Here.
Mr. Quagliano?
All right, we do have a quorum. If we could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. A fine country and a fine national anthem. Okay, so our first item on the agenda is our public comment. Any public comment? No public comment? Anyone? Going once? Going twice? All right. All right, contract with superintendent search firm. So I'm going to start off by making a motion that we approve the search firm contract with Hazard Young Atea and Associates to conduct the superintendent search as provided in the meeting agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second from Mr. Fleck. Any discussion related to this topic? I mean, hey, how you doing? All right, there's a motion and a second. Can I have roll call?
Mr. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Guerin?
Yes.
Mr. Troy?
Yes.
Mr. Quagliano? Mrs. Melendi?
Yes.
Mr. Drizel?
Yes.
Mr. Fleck?
Yes.
Okay, motion carries. We have approved the contract with Hazard Young and Atea, which is good because that would be awkward. All right. With that, item number 5, I'll make a motion to approve the employment contract to hire Dr. Bradley Hawk as interim superintendent for the period February 1st to June 30th, 2018, as identified in the agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second from Mr. Fleck. Any discussion? I did not get a chance to talk to him before he embarked on vacation, so I apologize, but most of you have spoken with him in the past and are familiar with him.
He did spend the day with us Friday, and we had a cabinet meeting, actually even an extensive cabinet meeting where we just, went over, a lot of transition things going on. So he's already getting well versed in the things going on in the district. And he's gone this week, but he will be back at the end of next week and begin transitioning. So.
Excellent. Yeah, so there'll definitely be an overlap period of time with you, so that's good. All right, can I have roll call?
Mr. Quagliano?
Yes.
Mr. Fleck?
Yes.
Mrs. Melendi?
Yes.
Mr. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Guerin?
Yes.
Mr. Troy?
Yes.
Mr. Drizel?
Yes. All right, motion carries, and we're not asking Mrs. and Mr. Fleck, just Mr. Fleck, right?
She can vote.
Do you
too,
need to
if
call
she'd like.
for an opinion?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so congratulations to Dr. Hawk. Look forward to working with him. Okay, with that in mind, we move on to item number 6, our superintendent search discussion. So we've asked Hazard Young to be here to help initiate the process and discussion around our superintendent search. So with that, Steve? Are you going to be working the computer here?
I wasn't sure if everyone had a chance to get on the portal. You all should have got an email from us with the portal.
Yeah, let me make sure the microphone's on here. If you want to have a seat and drive it from there, and that way the discussion's recorded.
No, it's fine. Okay. Connie's going to join me up here.
Okay.
And, or Ken, when he gets here, he's the closest one, but he's not here.
Okay.
Isn't that funny how that works? Yeah, I wasn't sure if it's easier to look at your portal or follow with this one. And I brought paper copies if people like to write notes on paper. So I'm not sure if you want paper copies of the information.
Anyone want theirs now? I mean, if you brought them, we'll take them.
Yeah, let me.
Yeah, if you have a hard copy, I'll take one.
Particularly when it gets to the calendar, writing dates on a piece of paper sometimes helps the calendar process. There's 3 for, okay, thank you. Those are theirs. Connie, here's the other piece, in case they want an agenda. So there's a calendar, and then I also brought some paper copies of the agenda that's up here, but again, if you'd like to make notes. So I like to think of this as a design meeting. I mean, there's lots of ways to do the search, and we have a great deal of flexibility as a company. And so we want to make sure that if you have ideas about the search process, things that you think are really important, we'd like to get those incorporated into the process. This is your search. We're simply here to facilitate your objectives of filling a vacancy. And so we're working with you, but supporting your efforts, and this is your appointment at the end of the day. With that in mind, is there anything besides the obvious of finding a superintendent, anything else that's important to you through the process that you think is really, that we need to keep in mind?
Well, I think the one thing that I'm, most interested is vetting out what each board member feels is important,
Okay.
what is a key characteristic, and coming up with an objective. I've used the term rubric to identify superintendent candidates moving forward, and that we have a common quantitative tool by which to do comparisons.
Okay. Great thought. That's part of the process as we go through it. Other things that are important to you as we look at the process. Well, let me just go, and if you have questions, just jump in, and Connie will likewise, and Ken when he arrives. So the portal is a way that we'll communicate as we go through the process, and so after tonight, we'll issue some notes, we'll load them onto the portal. So we try not to use a lot of paper in the spirit of being electronic. And so this is, everyone has a sign-in. It should work. If it for some reason doesn't work, then just feel free to, contact the number. Let me get on the screen here.
Has everyone had a chance to try out their login?
I have not logged in yet.
Did everybody receive a login?
Yeah, it works.
Good.
Okay, good.
Excellent. Okay.
Well, on the front here are our phone numbers. So on the front page, we try to put all the important stuff on the front page. So when you get to the first page, that's the contact information, right, the first paragraph for Connie, Ken, and myself, as well as Pat Newdecker, who's in Wisconsin. And so feel free to contact us anytime. The other thing that you'll see as we go down through this is the deliverables and the documents that we'll be going through as we go through the process. The reports that we give you will be uploaded here. So you'll see these, and all on the front page. I have to go through a lot of stuff to find out, well, what do we do, and what was that report about the rubric we're looking at, what are the characteristics we were thinking about, what's the calendar we're following. That'll all be uploaded on the portal for you, and you can just simply sign on, go to, and click on one of the deliverables. You can see over here on the right that we have a couple already. The technical proposal we gave you, the presentation I made, although I didn't get through all of it, my PowerPoint's here. Points that we didn't cover. Our typical search processes here, if you want to look at the process and what's contained, that's here for you. And so that's under the proposed section of how we get started. As we go through the process, then we'll get into the engaged part of the proposal. That's where we engage you as individual board members, as well as administrators in the district, as well as community members and staff, to get their ideas, community leaders, staff leaders, and so on, about what they're thinking. That ends up being a report called the leadership profile here, which is not there yet because we haven't done it. And then the desired characteristics is that summary that Don referred to, what's our common rubric, and that becomes the desired characteristics. That'll be uploaded here. The survey we'll do of the community, that'll be loaded here as well. That report will be here. Tonight we're going to really focus on this planning meeting topics and the protocols, and there's probably, maybe a dozen really important points we should cover tonight. Some of this we can put off until later meetings in order of time. Some of them are really important about how we get started. So we'll try to cover the most important things and then leave the other things for later meetings. You'll see on the front page again, The other phases that we'll go through are the recruiting phase, where we actually get into looking at the candidates and their application stuff coming in. On the right, we've loaded your vacancy on our website, so that's here. You can see that notice is there. And then we get down to the selecting part. We have a piece here about the interview process, the workshop. We'll probably upload for your view the interview script, the slate of candidates, and so on. So all that information that is going to be relevant to us as we go through the process, you'll see and should be visible to you on the front page. We think this is a really effective tool to help you stay in touch with us and what's happened. The transition phase is beyond the selection of the superintendent, about that next phase. So what are you thinking about in that phase about the superintendent's goals, your goals as a board with that person, potentially looking at the goals for the first year, the contract piece. Some districts look at strategic planning or superintendent mentoring for that phase as well. So that's something we talked about at the end, but that's on the front page should you have interest in what's there, and some things are already there. So again, on the front page, you see an item here for the calendar. Oh, connection was interrupted. Let's see if this will open. Julie, we need some help with the... Okay, here we go. Thanks. So here's the calendar that we just sent around to you. And this is the primary focus tonight. We'll leave this page and go back to the agenda, though, in a second. I just wanted you to see that this is already there for you. And then as we adjust it tonight, we'll put it back out there so it's on the front page. So if you need to see the calendar, this becomes really important, and hopefully you brought your calendars tonight. One of the most effective ways to make sure that it goes well is to have all the board members involved. And to do that, we have to have everyone synced up on the calendars for some really critical dates. There's some flexibility in the calendar for like individual interviews with you, but as we get down to interviewing the candidates, you really need to be here. So we need to adjust the dates to make sure you're all in town, and we can do that. And that's why these are proposed dates. They're flexible in the sense of what's your calendar. There may be some dates that are just not doable because the district is doing something and you're all involved in that, or you're out of town, or a number of you are out of town, just given potential conflicts of calendars. So we'll come back to that in a second. Let's see. I'm not sure. We got this, but it's not going back to...
I was able to surf around, so I know I'm connected, but I don't know if you're on the same network.
Try the back button up here. See if it'll go back to the page prior. It'll let you take off.
There we go. Okay, super. Thanks a lot. So this is on the front page. We'll go to this this agenda, and there are some notes here that we can go over. There's also some, again, some repeats of the active search page, for example. Our the board portal is also, you need to know about Therese, our Director of Operations. So if you need to reach our office beyond the three of us, the four of us, that's Therese's number. And she probably will work a lot with Julie as we go through the process to make sure things are coordinated and are moving along as if there's dates or conflicts or information about groups and schedules and so on. So one of the first things is the board liaisons. I don't know if we've moved beyond. I know we met with Don and Tony, and is that going to be the liaisons? Is that, or somebody else, or just Don, or?
Well, we talked about, how we've been structured to this point, and Tony and I have taken the lead on the steps at this point. We as a board have not discussed, moving beyond that, but I'd be open to being the liaison and Tony as well as a, as a fail-safe. So if one doesn't respond, at least the other one will, if the board is okay with that. Yeah. Right.
Okay. That's super. So we'll make a note of that, and we do the note that'll come back that's what we've decided. We did the contract tonight, so number 3 is done.
Sorry, what document are you on right now?
On the second page on the first page, you see the planning meeting. It's under the engage part. It's like a big blue
Okay.
line.
Corresponding to the printout, the stapled printout as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah. If you hit on that, then this is the agenda that's under the next page.
Okay.
So, and I've dropped down to point 4, which is the the superintendent search process flow chart. If you want to get an idea of the overall picture of this at your leisure, feel free to click on it. It's a one-pager. It shows a little bit about the board responsibilities, which are to do the planning with us, the calendar, do the interviews, make a final decision, employ the superintendent, and it lists our responsibilities as consultants, which are to do the engagement groups, write a report, do the preliminary screening, provide you a slate, et cetera. All that's laid out in a very clear chart for you to look at. You want me to go over that tonight with you? Is there any need to review that? Any aspects of that? I'm happy to talk more, but
No,
yeah, I did. We covered it. It's just there as a resource.
yeah, the only thing I would indicate that I didn't see in there were maybe milestone points. And I know this isn't a timeline, this is more of a process flow, but
Yeah.
Identification of communication points in the process.
Right.
When, from a best practices perspective or from your experience, when is it best to issue press releases or
Right.
internal communications or things of that nature? If there's a model like that, I'd be interested.
Okay. Yeah, we have some guidelines that we have some sample documents for you, communication toolkit. And a lot of it goes to what's your normal way of doing things locally. When we want to continue to use your local culture and communication channels.
Well, we don't normally hire superintendents, so
Yeah,
there is no normal in that.
that's good news. But in terms of, we can work with Julie on that, or if you have someone who does that and wants to talk about that. And the biggest thing probably is the upfront conversation about the search process, and there's some model documents for that to release about we're doing a search.
Perfect.
Here's why, that kind of thing. And there's information about the online survey, for example, that goes out. And then there'll be information about the report on desired characteristics can go out. And a lot of it will be loaded on your website. And so because of that, you're pushing things out that way as well as we go through the process. So
Okay, so I would envision working with Dan Armstrong,
Okay.
our communications director, on a number of those things.
If there are other questions about the search process as we go through it, let me know. But we'll be talking about, again, the communication piece and other timelines as we get into the calendar. As we talked, point 5 is really the discussion about how much community engagement and where do you want that to be. It's a process where boards nationally have kept the process pretty closed because it affects your recruiting ability. When the searches are very open, people tend not to apply from their existing jobs because people find out they're applying and then they don't like that. If you're a current board of the superintendent, you find out that he or she applied down the road, then so we don't get a lot of applicants in those very open processes. So what's designed here, and there's a chart here to look at, and we can flip that up in a second, is a process where the board can make the entire decision along the way at the end. Up front, we're developing the desired characteristics and what people are thinking is important. Hey, Ken, up here.
Not to draw attention to your lateness, but hey, come on up here.
I took the new Long Meadow Parkway. I'm so excited. I got lost on the park.
That
in
straight line.
conclusion-
Yeah, it's confusing.
Taking a tour.
So we're just going through the agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so here's, if you have to sign on there.
I'm
paper.
really embarrassed.
No, thank you for playing along with us. You know.
Oh, here we go. So, so in the.
Now he did it, his presence
Yeah.
disconnected the you know you're going to be blamed for everything now. It's just, it's how it works.
Oh, hit that? Oh. Okay, thank you. We're going to have to go out for a meal when we're done here, it looks like, the way we're going. So the community engagement, the board is charged with making a decision, but up front, we've involved community members, the community leaders, faculty, and so on, and non-certified staff, employees of the district to say, what do you think is important for this job? What are the challenges going to be? What do you think is important as you look to the future for the district's leadership? What kind of a leader do you want? We gather all that information from our community engagement groups, and then as we do that, we talk about this is how the community is involved with the search process. You're telling the board what you think is important. We're sharing that with the board. The board's asked for your input, and so that's very important. Some districts have decided, though, that down the road later on they would like some input from the community as well, and this is where this chart can be helpful. And we don't need to do this tonight. It's something to think about. How much involvement do you think you want to see? And again, part of it's driven by how much engagement do you usually have as a district, the collaboration, and part of it's driven by we really want to make sure it's confidential so we get the very best candidates nationally without exposing candidates to potential embarrassing situations in their home districts. So you'll notice that there's a range of possibilities here going across the top, from full disclosure of candidates interviewed, the names of candidates that are being interviewed by the board are released to the public. That's done in some states where everything's open. Sometimes, in column 2, there are community forums, and the final 2 or 3 candidates would go to a forum, and it may be here. Questions are directed to the candidates from the community. Community may give you some feedback on sheets or cards as they leave about what they thought about their interaction. Then the third one has some popularity, some places where you might have a group of 15 or 18 people made up of representatives of the community and the staff. They're a confidential group. They're asked to sign a confidentiality statement saying they'll keep everything confidential. They interview in a room as part of the process, give you the feedback on what they saw in terms of strengths and limitations of each candidate. They're not part of the decision making. They're providing you feedback and viewpoints of what they saw. That has takes a little bit of coordination because we have to have somebody with them from our office to coordinate, help them write questions, keep notes, give the notes back to you before you interview the candidate who's coming in the next hour or two. But you're giving their feedback actually before you see the candidates. That's done a little bit in some places. Finally, it's completely confidential where there's nothing beyond the initial engagement that we do with the community about what you're looking for. Everything that you do after that is confidential with the board until the very end when you announce the candidate. So, again, we don't need to decide this tonight unless you have a particular viewpoint about this. We can certainly meet this or look at this again, review this again as we go through the search process, when we get down to getting the finalists and where are they all coming from and how comfortable are they about being released.
Well, let me ask the board, is there anyone that cares to make any comment on a preference here? And
Yeah, I mean,
like Steve said, we don't necessarily have to, and we can let the process play out a little bit, but if
my inclination would be to don't really go beyond finalist at most. So kind of more on the spectrum of being more towards the confidential side.
Right.
Just because of the quality of candidate issue. I think that's a good point where it'd be a little bit hard to submit publicly for a job. I mean, just from my, personal experience.
Right.
I can't imagine saying, yeah, I'm posting for this job, I hope I get it.
Going into work and
Yeah.
telling your boss, yeah, I have three
Yeah.
potential opportunities out there.
Right.
Be excited for me. Yeah.
If I could ask one question, though, does that have to be decided before
No.
people start applying? Because won't people ask you that
They
when
do,
they
but
say,
we typically tell them there are no secrets.
yeah,
As much as it's confidentiality, you get in the search process, and as much as we tell them we're going to keep it confidential, you're going to tell them that lightning strikes and somebody finds out somehow, some way. Not that we intend, you don't intend that, but we also tell them that once you get down to the final three, you're likely to be very public, because board members will be calling their board members to
Right.
verify vetting and reference beyond what we're doing. So when you get to the final three, you're very likely to be known about, so know that, and we explain that to them way up front, very early. But I like to make people know that, it just is not anything that's guaranteed, because for some reason, somebody sees somebody walk in, to a meeting room, you can't keep all that buttoned up sometimes, and people call each other, you have a confidential committee, but maybe somebody didn't play the game fairly, and they went out and called somebody, so.
Yeah, I think this isn't a legal commitment, more so as an initial expectation setting for the candidates.
Right.
And as long as the initial candidates understand that it is not our intent to make it a public first round,
Right.
then I think it opens up the opportunity for more and better candidates.
Well, and to John's point, we certainly let them know it's a confidential search at the end of the day. And when we know if you're going to have a confidential committee or you're going to have a forum, we'll let them know that. But in Illinois, you're certainly able to have a confidential search. I don't probably think you're going to disclose the names of all the candidates as they apply, so that part's off the table. So at some level, it's going to be confidential as much as we can until you make another decision about the forums. And again, that's why I give it to you tonight to think about. We'll have other meetings where we talk about the interview process, the script and so on, and we can talk about, are we going to have a forum that we need to announce through our communication channels, time and place and so on. Other questions about this particular chart, or thoughts or decisions you want to make about this tonight?
Yeah, if you want.
Yeah, I guess I'm just agreeing with Kevin on this. I think being more to the confidential side makes sense for what we need to do. I think that's the best process. If we had to pick between, any four of these, my preference would be completely confidential, but I could lean more towards the confidential stakeholder committee involved sort of thing.
Okay. Anyone else?
Actually, just a quick follow-up question to that. When kind of talking about community or constituent type feedback forums, what do those look like? What's your experience in terms of how many people? How is that type of process run? Because I think that would impact at least how I think about basically column 3 versus column 4.
You want to respond to something? Or you just?
Well, it really depends on the community.
Got a green light on?
Oh, I'm sorry.
There we go. No worries.
It really depends on the community. Unfortunately, many times they're very small. But if it's a high-profile position, as you would have, it all depends. It really depends. Sometimes they could have like 50 people there, and sometimes maybe a couple, and sometimes 0. So it's kind of, it's based upon how it's advertised, announced, and the people that are invited.
Okay. I mean, is it like kind of like a town hall Q&A type setup, or?
They're typically, 5:30 in the afternoon. There's a 45-minute time limit, so they don't go on forever. That's known up front. You can ask for questions when people come in the door, write them down. Somebody collects them, we give them to the candidates, or
Okay.
somebody acts as the MC. So there's not a lot of meeting and greeting kind of going on. It's more of a questions and answers, or questions from the audience. But sometimes people try to control that by having the questions in a card given to up front, and you have a little more control. The time limit's important, but they're really, I think, everybody's well behaved. They're pretty, people know each other that come to those things. I've had them 75 to 100 people. A lot of people don't say anything, they come to watch.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you
Kind of like
get
a board candidate review. Sounds exactly like it.
Woodstock did that, right? You did their search.
They did. I
And
wasn't there, but they did.
But they had the final three
Yeah.
when they hired Mike. The final three, I think, did a public Q&A forum, and I think Woodstock felt that was very important in their community to do. That is, they didn't do that when I got hired here. I don't think this community would necessarily expect that here, but.
But it's an option, again, something to think about as you think about it. I mean, the forums are one way to handle a lot of people, and everybody's involved. They're going to know the names of 3 finalists over 3 different nights. Ahead of your interview, you get a chance to get the feedback. People can write comments. You take those sheets with you and look at them as you interview and plow some of those comments maybe into interview questions. But there's not, I don't know that those are done a lot. I would say, maybe 1 in 20 or something like that. The confidential committee is even less, probably. So most searches where you can do confidentiality are really confidential.
Okay. And when you do that type of, 3 candidates in a
Right.
scenario like that, is it common then to come to a decision, within 24 to 48 hours after that, so as not to have too much of a, lack of better terms, a circus after those open sessions?
Right. You try to keep the interviews going along that same time frame. So if the candidate's having a forum, you're interviewing them that evening potentially.
Okay.
And then the next night you have a forum, you're interviewing a candidate, and then you're debriefing in a couple of days about the 3 candidates we just saw. Who's our pick?
Okay.
Sort of like the Bears.
No, don't. For the record, we're not going to use that analogy in this search ever again. Strike that from the record. Thank you.
So the decisions, all the decisions move pretty quickly. Once we start the interview process, it's kind of a couple of days interviews, decision, couple of days more interviews, the decision, offer a contract. And we'll see that in the calendar when we get there. Yeah. Hey, enough about this. You want to talk more about this? We have kind of a direction of confidentiality, but maybe some involvement, depending on how we talk about this later.
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's fair.
All right.
A definite maybe.
Definitely maybe. Got it.
So start out confidential, and then we'll assess as we go along.
Okay.
Nice.
I do have another question.
Sure.
And I'm sorry if you kind of covered it, but if we really want to preserve confidentiality, knowing the realities of that, but then it turns into a circus, what do you guys do to kind of rein it back in? Or is the cat out of the bag?
You mean the forum piece of it?
Yeah, any part of it, really. If it really starts to, if we lose control over any confidentiality in the search to try and preserve a good search, things go crazy. Do you have kind of protocols for?
Well, I'll tell you
Putting the horse
what
back in the
typically
barn?
happens when that happens, it has meant, in most places, the board members start talking out of the meetings. And then when that happens and board members start calling other boards about potential slates that we presented, then you lose all your candidates. And so that takes care of it immediately, because you have no candidates at that point. So it's when board members don't play by the rules and have agreed to do the right thing the right way, but then don't. And that happens across the country sometimes. But otherwise, the process is made to move ahead, and we really haven't had problems with that kind of crazy stuff going on. I mean, the candidates are very interested, so they want to keep it confidential. The district office staff is looking for the next leader. The board wants to get it done. I mean, everybody's kind of motivated to get it finished, and we haven't really seen that. But I think, again, the biggest problem is if people on the board don't keep it confidential, right, quite honestly. And for different reasons, people have done it across the country, maybe to scuttle it, to get their own candidate in or whatever. But typically it goes really well. I think part of it's the timeline, goes pretty quick. Once we start interviewing, once we do our interviews preliminarily and give you a slate, we're talking a week. And then we're talking another week for the interviews, and then a final decision. So in a couple of weeks, they're going to know so it goes pretty quickly. On back to the agenda a little bit, the interviews with board meetings. We'll be meeting with the board members during those community engagement pieces to talk to you about what you want to see in the superintendent and the leadership qualities. We'll see that on the schedule when we get to it. We'll point that out again, but that's very important that we meet with you individually. as opposed to meeting with the entire board, which I think isn't as effective. And we've done this where we either meet with you face-to-face or we do it by phone conversation. So if you're not available, we can do it over the phone. 30 minutes to an hour, depends on, what you have to say and how much you want to talk about this and so on. So that's coming up, again, in the calendar. One of the things to talk about with the district will be, as we do the process, we'll need to identify the focus groups and that are from the community, and so we give you some guidelines about that. You will have your own probably community groups that you've met with over the years and people you go to, and so this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. And sometimes there's specialty groups in every community that meet and are pretty active, but these are groups that we either meet with individually as a group or put them together. So we might meet with all the district office administrators, for example, as a group, and then the principals and assistant principals will be a different group because they have different interests as a building principal or assistant principal. We typically the support staff leadership and the support staff are two different meetings. So we meet with the union leadership of the support staff separately in a room, but we would have typically an after-school meeting for the support staff who want to attend and talk to us. So we're getting a couple of shots with the support staff. Teacher union meeting is a separate meeting, again, a separate group, and then representatives of teachers who want to be at a meeting, typically after school, to talk to us, we're there for that. And then there's internal representation of groups that are listed here. It depends on districts, department heads, directors. Depends on how big you are, what kind of level of structures you have. Student groups we meet with. We try to do that from middle school on up. Former board members, some may want to be involved. You may feel their leadership is important to you. Again, the PTO, PTA council, other parent groups, booster parent groups, those kind of leadership groups in your district might be important. Private school representation, higher ed representation, the clergy representation, government leadership, certainly the village leadership, the fire, police departments, and so on. But again, you may have local cultural groups or local advocacy groups that are important to you that you reach out to, and we could add to this list. We try to do these groups over 2 days. So the three of us are here meeting every hour with a different group. So we're in 3 different rooms, essentially, is how this happens. So it looks like a long list. We work with Julie and others to coordinate this. The important piece is for the district to reach out to your list of people to say, we've got these meetings coming up in February or whatever dates we establish, and we want you to be available. Your meeting time is February 1st at 2 o'clock in the afternoon at the district office, or 9 o'clock in the village hall, or et cetera. So we work on where's it going to be, but we really need the district's help in pulling together what groups we're talking about. These are suggested groups.
And if I could add, this is really important for the board, because if you ignore or omit some group, they're going to come back and say, well, I guess we never counted. And then they will always remind you of that. So this is one where we're willing to meet with any and all, but we need the board and the administration's input as to whom we should meet. And it makes no difference where we go. So this is one that you have to really think it through.
Also, if people are not able to be present when some of those meetings are taking place, the online survey is available, and they can provide input in that way.
And then we typically hold a forum at the end of these days that we're talking about, where we invite anyone in who wants to come in just to talk that we didn't have in part of the group. So community at large kind of a forum where we meet with them in a room like this. We'll get some turnout, not always a big turnout, particularly if things are going along pretty well, but there'll be a few people show up. We'll spend an hour with them talking about the probes that we've asked these people as well. So there's a way to, kind of an all-call, if you will, so we get to everyone we can get to.
And at what point do you envision getting the input on these groups then from the district and from the board?
Well, I think we'll work with whether you have a community relations person or Julie to say what are the groups going to be. We can give a schedule. The dates we should decide tonight probably, or pretty close to it, and then immediately start making some contact about the schedule. And we can say, basically what happens is we have a little bit of a lunch break. Otherwise, we start at 8 in the morning or whatever is good for the district to open, and we usually go to 5 in the afternoon. Then there's a little bit of a break, and we have a community forum at 6:30 for an hour. And so we'll know the dates. It's a matter of you reaching out to all your particular community groups, the unions, the staff, the administrators. The staff and administrators are pretty easy because you have a pretty good direct line to those folks, and they'll want to be involved. It's the village, the clergy, the higher ed, the private school folks are a little harder to track down. Again, the groups that you work with, maybe the chamber, maybe there's a business partnership group, or there's another association of some sort that's important to you. Tracking them down and saying, hey, can you be here January 31st at 9 o'clock? And if they miss their group, they can come to another group. The other thing is we're really flexible, so if they miss their 9 o'clock group, but they can come at 10, come at 10. You know, it's not life and death kind of a thing. And we're looking for trends. We try to organize those trends around who we're meeting with: staff, community, board, administration, and so on. But if we have somebody come and talk with missed the government meeting and came to the clergy meeting, we'll separate that out and make sure the notes from their comments get back to where they belong.
And we're more than willing to go to Sun City at their location,
No,
if you want.
no, yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely valuable input.
So the thing that's, we have the sample survey here, which some of you may be interested in. But one of the things we need to know, it'd be good to know this tonight. I have a suggestion for you, but we certainly can change this. I always forget to go down and open that up down here. So when we do the survey to the community and we have our questions that we ask, then we will organize those categories by 6 groups. And so sometimes people want different groups than what we can handle. You have other groups. So typically, the administrators, because there's several in the district, the teachers, the support staff, they have their own group. Students may have a group, parents may have a group, and community members. We have room for 6 groups, whichever groups we want to do. We don't usually put board members in as a group because there's only 7 of you, and we're interviewing you individually, so you already have your impact. And so for a survey, it's not as critical as we have you. So typically, the administrator, teachers would be number 2, support staff would number 3, students 4, parents 5, and community members 6 is how we usually organize that. But if you have other suggestions about who should be in that survey grouping, happy to listen to that tonight, see what we can do to make sure we have that done that way.
Any thoughts? Feedback?
Do those work, or do you have anything that you've thought about?
In terms of, other groups that may be missing here or lumped in community member, is that usually where you see some segmentation?
Right. You end up with, people from the government aspect or from the senior citizens group and so on, but we're looking for leadership characteristics. We're not trying to accommodate a group of interested people about an agenda.
Right.
We don't need to know what the senior citizens think about the style of the cars today. We're looking for leadership. And so we do tend to, and it tends to be less of those folks involved, so we try to make sure there's enough there to have a representative group. There'll be a lot of staff involvement, support staff involvement. The students will be really supportive of the survey. They'll respond really well. Parents will respond heavily, for sure. And administrators will play an active role. The community members, you have, again, your leaders, your taxing body boards like the library board, the Parks and Rec, fire boards, other organizations that when we invite in community members to the civic leadership, we're thinking about the directors of those organizations, for example. Higher ed could be part of that group, the clergy is part of that group. So we have a lot included there, but if you start separating them out, there's not that many maybe civic leaders, for example. or civic board members in other organizations. So I'm not sure what that does for you anyway, particularly.
Well, I was almost thinking that something like that, either, civic members or government body members,
Okay.
as opposed to students. And it's not that I'm not interested in what the students' opinion are, but I think they can be, lumped into the community member segment and still have an impact. But I think it's important to know how our civic leaders, our community leaders, and members of those bodies that steer the government entities around us
Great suggestion.
feel about that.
And we're not checking on anyone, so it's how they self-identify. This is not a scientific survey per se,
Right.
so you get a little bit of that. But I think that's a great point. That's
Yeah.
why we asked the questions to design this.
Or it
along
could even
what's
be
important.
parent or student attending school, and they can
Yeah,
be
yeah.
put in the same group. And again, I don't think we're going to solicit much feedback from our K through 5 students. We're going to get if students are going to provide input, it's probably going to be, the high school students and maybe a few overachieving middle school
And we'll
students.
try to have a group of kids from the high school and kids from the middle school to talk to us.
Mm-hmm.
And usually those are kids that are pretty involved in school and have at least verbal about things. And so we'll get their input that way as well. They'll have a group to meet with our associates to talk about what they're thinking. Any other comments about the grouping that Don's suggested? Ready to move, is that good? Ready to move ahead on this? The survey is one of the first things that comes out that we'll need to notify people about, and they'll be seeing right away. That's one of the very quick things, and one of the creating awareness of the survey is important. So people go to the website, tap on the survey, and we load that up for you with you, and then they're ready to access that. But that'll happen pretty quickly. We do get, as part of the survey, some open-ended questions and comments. We handle those under a separate cover. We don't edit those. We tend to hold on to those. They're just informational for us, typically. We really feel that those are more research questions. They help us clarify what we heard already in the engagement groups that we've had throughout the days that we're here, or the regular survey. And so we typically hold on to those. If you want those are transcribed verbatim. So for all those comments that say John was the best superintendent, you can't possibly replace him, that'll be there. For those that say John wasn't such a good superintendent, and it's about time he left, that'll be there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes those comments aren't what you want to see.
Signed, Nikki Berkey.
But you get anything and everything in those open-ended comments is why we typically don't release them, because they're just not that helpful, frankly. People like to kind of comment, they're anonymous, and so you get anything and everything. And we can talk about the release of those comments to you once we get the survey done and take a look at them too. Anything else about those decisions on the survey groupings? Have we done it?
Good.
All right.
Do you want to talk about the languages or?
Oh, yeah, good point. Thank you. Fire away.
There is, you probably see on the, when we're taking a look at the technical decisions for the community survey, you can also have it done in Spanish if there is, a need in the community. If you are looking at additional languages, then there's a cost of $315 per language. But Spanish can also, the survey can be done in Spanish as well as English.
Okay.
So is that something that's beneficial?
I think it could be. I couldn't answer that right now, but it's obvious it could be.
Okay.
I'll work with the administration and see, from a percentage of our population, I think there may be value in it.
Okay.
And that's pretty standard, so it's
Yeah.
typically done. Some communities want other Polish and other languages. They have a big influx of certain populations. And we get so many requests that we had to start charging for it because we just couldn't handle which one it was going to be. Great, thank you. The other, again, bullet, number of candidates, we typically handle this a little later, but it's just something to think about. We usually have, I think I said this in our presentation, 5 or 6 candidates. As I said to you before, when I think I presented, because I say this all the time, depending on the quality of the candidates, we may only have 3 candidates for you. We feel like only 3 people we interview can do the job, then you may only get 3 candidates. But our goal is to have 5 or 6. We think that'll happen. Certainly, it's a highly desirable district with a lot going on and great successes and great location. And so we think you'll have a good number. So 5 or 6 probably works. We'll review the candidates with you when we get to that point. You may want to interview 8 people. Just at your time, and you can decide, do we want to interview for 3 days or 2 days? And we want, if those candidates are so closely ranked, maybe we want to see candidates 7 and 8, or 6, or maybe we don't need to see 5 because we don't think that's going to fit with. We need to see 4 people. So that's kind of fluid as well, depending on, again, the candidate pool once you see it, once we get down to that point in time. Any questions about the candidates? We've talked about internal candidates already tonight, here before we started the meeting, so I think Tony and Don talked to us about that. Others have mentioned that to us. Obviously have a lot of confidence in internal candidates. I suggested to the internal candidates that I met tonight, and there may be others, that I'd meet with them away from here to individually to give them lay of the land.
Definitely.
No, usually internal candidates with the stability you've had aren't always candidates every month or every year. So take them through what usually happens with the searches, help them get ready for the searches. If they want that, we're happy to do that as a separate piece of this. So we've had that conversation tonight. So.
If I also may add, it's really important that the entire board be present for the interviews. You can't have just 6 people there. All 7 have to be there, because just one absence, pending a family emergency, it shows that maybe it gives a bad image. So you really need to make sure that you pick the dates that everybody can be present.
Yeah, obviously, we will all try to be there. There's, we run the gamut in different careers and different professions and different stages of employment. So, we have a history of being available for those type of things. So I don't see that as being an issue. And if for any reason someone wasn't there, it would definitely be a significant reason.
The other point about that, some districts will have arrangements where people can call in.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you have to be out of town and you can't be here, but you're going to participate and you really want to participate, then certainly that can happen as well. A little clunky, but it certainly is done. Candidate expenses, as well as associate expenses, we pay our associates mileage and so on. None of our associates are staying overnight or anything, so that's not a problem, but there is mileage reimbursement. Candidates that come from out of state typically are their airfare and hotel expenses if that's incurred. Some boards will say, we're not paying that. You can come and interview. We hope you do, but we're not paying it. That's a very minority position, but it's happened in some districts in some parts of the country. But typically, we're talking about candidates in that final 5. So you're talking about a couple people, maybe 3 people or something. I think our candidates will be from Illinois. We'll maybe get some out-of-state candidates, hopefully, as we've talked previously. But that's being awareness.
Okay. Any comments or discussion from the board on that topic? Any concerns? I mean, I'm definitely for it. I would just ask that we get a general idea of what those expenses might be, and those are run by us before. It's not just a blanket approval.
No, and we really tell them you're flying coach. If you have to rent a car, you're renting a reasonable car. We're not renting out first class and a limousine and that kind of thing. So it's a very reasonable, and we watch this very closely. And
we'll watch it closely too.
Yeah, I looked at the guidelines, and they seem like they're very conservative. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay.
Then on the other hand, the choices made are very good feedback too on what they choose to submit for reimbursement.
Yeah, exactly. You're just always worried, there may be some candidates from, out of state that just by the nature of where they're located, have to jump a few planes to get here, and,
Yeah.
you know, their cost could be a bit
Well,
high.
you
so.
can't get, if you have a meeting till 11 o'clock, you can't always get a flight back to Idaho at 11 o'clock or something
Right.
like that. And again, we try to avoid that. Candidates are really, they're coached about that as well. Look, we're not, if you want to come and spend a weekend in Chicago, great, but we're not covering your expenses downtown, you know, so on
Okay.
and so forth. So we really work on that, and most of the candidates we run into, we have a few problems only when we have really high-profile candidates, and they're going to these big jobs and are used to being kind of out there on the first-class arrangement. The advertising is a decision point that would be good to talk about tonight, because these are things that happen right away, and we've started recruiting by phone call and by our website. So you're aware of our website, I think, and then this is a list of how far you may want to go with advertising. We've done it by packages to try to help districts exposure as much as you can. I can tell you we get a lot of play on our website, because the candidates know that we have that website for all search firms and all superintendent searches on our website, so we get a lot of traffic there. That's become a really a cost saver to districts because we do that and people are looking at it all the time. I would say that some districts, very high-profile districts, will go to package 3 when they want their own ad for the month and appear monthly plus a dedicated ad. They get the online listing in Ed Week, top school jobs. Those are places that people go. Some of this is electronic. I think that on the other end, $1,900 will get most things done that you want to get done for advertising. Again, based on people checking our website, based on Ed Week, being in our group ad means that we may list our 10 searches for the month, and you would be in that list of 10 with 10 searches, or usually it's only 4 or 5 searches for that particular time period. So you're 1 of 5. That gets a lot of play. We found that that's a way to save money for districts. Otherwise, it gets up to $4,500, $5,000 to run your own specific ad nationally. Any feeling about where you want to be on that advertising situation? And we also use the free ads we can get in Illinois. So ones we can do free, we certainly get those out there when we can and where we can.
Thoughts?
If this is considered kind of a high-profile position, does it sort of advertise itself, or?
I think so, because in Illinois, there's just, frankly, right now, not a ton of jobs open, so you get, it's very aware. John being in Luda, and people in Luda all know that that transition's happening, so all the Luda districts would be potential, a place for candidates, would be aware, and they talk to people. So, John's involvement and stability here, the location of the district, being in suburban Chicago, is going to generate a lot of interest just by location. And the fact that people looking for jobs, there's just not a lot to choose from right now. There's just not a ton of jobs. People are staying put. Nationally, people typically go to Ed Week or top school jobs, plus our website or other websites where these things are listed. So I'm not encouraging you to spend a lot of money on this. I don't think you have to. I think you ought to spend a little bit, maybe.
Well, yeah, and I think what you hit on makes sense. The people, maybe locally, even statewide, are going to know about this.
Yeah.
But if we're trying to reach out to others, that's where we should be putting our dollars.
Right.
So is your thought that looking nationally, that would gear itself more towards package 3? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, actually, no. I kind of was going the other direction with it.
Okay.
that-
Yeah, because that's the direction I was going too.
Yes.
I don't think we need to sell our district.
Yeah,
I think,
no, I would want to be more conservative on the advertising, because I think we're going to get a lot of, we don't need to advertise to get a lot of quality candidates, but if we're going to reach out, we should go with a package, with a less costly package that reaches out to those people, instead of, there's no point in advertising to the people that already know about the job.
Right.
right.
And we for years have worked with Ed Week, AESA, and the top jobs, and we get tremendous response from that. But I think a lot of times, ask people how they find out, they heard about it. They just hear about those things. It's just out there. If you're looking, you know where to look if you're looking for a position. And
So-
again, the other part of it's our recruiting effort. I mean, we try to be tenacious about recruiting, and so a lot of people may not even look online because they're not looking, but then our phone calls are working with people, networking to find candidates, typically pulls people out, which isn't a cost in terms of advertising or anything.
This is like picking the student pictures, you know? Do I get the free 8x10 or the sheet of glasses? So in package 2, the only difference I see with package 1 is, the number of print ads and then the online spotlight and
Spotlight,
preferred
yeah.
upgrades. Can you talk about that? What is
Just
that?
that AASA has some other places they put stuff, and it just gives a different view. But again, still AASA, which you have on the first package as well.
Right.
It just runs in their special spotlight editions, and not everybody accesses that anyway. So I'm not saying that's giving you a lot of advantages. But there's a cost to that for us, so
Right.
we pass it on.
And then the difference between a single print ad versus two of them,
Right.
is that just to kind of catch them at different points in
Yeah,
the?
but they'd run either early in the
periodical.
month, maybe late in the month, so 2 ads.
Oh, okay.
I mean, so the 2 ads wouldn't necessarily run week to week, they might run now and then later again, so that you get 2 group ads. If you're looking at the HYA group ad, is that what you're looking at, Ed Week?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you might be with 4 districts this week, and a couple weeks or 3 weeks from now, you might be at the 5 or 6 districts for a second time.
Okay. I mean, I probably have a tendency to consider that to be the most valuable one here. I always think that sometimes one doesn't necessarily get the feelers, but when they see it a second time, it might cause somebody to reconsider and then
Yep.
submit. Is that maybe what people are thinking? It's an $800 print ad, additional print ad. No? Package 1? Package 2?
2.
One, 2, 1, 2,
Number 2.
2, 4, 3 in favor of package 1.
That's fine.
Package 1. If you change your mind tomorrow, Don, call me, it's not a preference, we can change your preferences. Okay, let's go back.
But do we get the red eye reduction?
Oh, sure, yeah. Okay, we did that. The background checks we won't do tonight, we can skip that. That's our due diligence report. We'll do that with you once we get down to interviewing the slate and how many we have and who do you know. And that's a matter of how many do we want to do due diligence reports on, and and they run anywhere from $1,100 to $1,900 each. So we decide, how well you know the candidates and what do we know about them before you decide that. Salary and fringe benefits, we'll talk to you later on, too, about try to decide about salary ranges based on some benchmarking that you may do already in your
Yep.
area. That'll be driven probably largely by experiences that you bring from superintendents that are applying. If you get sitting superintendents, they tend to be paid sometimes more than assistant superintendents, and so you're looking at current salaries versus what's being paid in the district and what's paid around you and so on. So that's kind of a dynamic area, but the good news is with everything in Illinois anyway being on websites, and most states have it on websites, we have a pretty good idea of what people are getting paid around you. So we usually sort that out. I think Adam and I talked about that a little bit too, getting his help with that as well. Any comments about that area?
No, I think we've already gotten the ball rolling on considering that, and,
Okay.
so.
Great. That's one we talk to the candidates about. We'll want to talk to you about that at some point. We start getting serious for recruits, because they'll ask us, am I moving? Is it worthwhile my move, et cetera? Am I moving for $5,000? Are they locked in on that? Can we negotiate, et cetera, et cetera? So we'll have some conversations with you about that conversation. What do you have with candidates?
I think that's just common, right? Yeah.
The other big one of interest, particularly to suburban candidates, will be residency expectations. I don't know if they're going to move in with John or, or Don, maybe you want to get room for them.
Get extra room in your garage? Well, 3 days a week when he's down in Springfield, there's an opening there.
There you go. So, kind of, and when you're in a little closer in suburbia, people are, going to apply for a job in Palatine can usually live in Schaumburg or in the area.
Right.
When you get a little further out, that's harder to do, and you may not want people living in Harvard or Woodstock or Rockford.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any preferences about this or thoughts on this, or is something we need to talk about later? You want to think about that, and you certainly are able to talk later about that. Just want to bring it up, but that will be a consideration. Some folks have reasons why they can't move today, but they could be here in a year. Maybe their child's finishing high school,
Right.
or maybe someone's in a special program in a special facility. Maybe they've got a parent they're taking care of for a year, and until they get them into a place, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, well, I think, and I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in, but I think we've had some conversations on that. We want to talk a little bit more about that, just to kind of collect our thoughts, and we can give you some direction on that, by the time the night ends. You might be gone, I don't know. We've got closed session afterwards. We've got some conversations, but we'll get word to you then.
Okay, or I can stick around if you want me to stick around.
Okay.
Or Ken, well, he came late, he'll stay late.
All right, he's beating on you now. It ain't me.
I know, I hear it. I deserve it.
Yeah.
One of the things that is later on too is a transition. You need help with the goals, the organizational goals, and the board workshop about coming together as a new board, a new team. We certainly do that. The calendar piece, you have in front of you. This calendar on this page is going to be blank, so I want to go back to our previous calendar if we can do that. Let's see. Okay, so this is probably the most difficult part of the evening, and I've used up a lot of time already. So this kind of lays out your involvement in the process and our work through the search process. Tonight's January 9th. We're at the board planning meeting. That's what we've been doing, obviously.
Excellent. We're 1 for 1 on schedule.
We're so far, and everybody's here, so we had a high expectation for the
Being a
future.
project manager, I'd love to see that. That's good.
The next dates that we looked at, and Julie too, if you and the staff, if you have things about these dates, jump in, because there may be some real conflicts that the board or us may not be aware of. I did put at the bottom of this the board meetings. As much as we can line up with your board meeting schedule, we like to do that, save you another night out. So maybe you want to refer to those board meetings that we listed down below. The next one are the community engagement meetings. Those are where we are here for 2 days. I put 3 days because sometimes it bleeds over. And sometimes the 29th, 30th, 31 may not work. Maybe it's got to be 30 and then 31 and then February 1st or something like that. The reason that I push these down a little bit, and we have only a couple of weeks before we're ready to be back here to do the interviews with your engagement groups, is the end date I have. You go down to the bottom, the target date for public announcement, April 19th. When I've had other conversations, I think with Don and Tony, we were concerned about the timing of this a little bit, when we're going to be done. We can shorten this schedule up to be done earlier, but it changes the design of the search quite a bit when you do that. I personally have one, and I've seen this happen recently in a district in the southwest suburbia. They were driven so much by being done so early, they're virtually cutting out community engagement, it looks like to me, to get that done. I think you gain a lot from having the board and the community involved in the process to where people know what's happening. They're part of the process. I think that makes a good start for the new team down the road. So we build in the community engagement January 29th, 30, 31. The online survey would open that same time, for January 28th, be open for a couple weeks to February 11th. We would bring back to you then February 22nd a report of all that input we gathered on those days. And I think that's a board meeting night, if I'm not mistaken. So we try to hit a board meeting night. The interviews for board members would be the 29th, 30th, and 31st, and that's where we try to hit you guys at, maybe one of you at 9, somebody at 8, somebody at 11, somebody at 2, during those days as we go through those couple days. And then, so there's no board meetings between now and your board meeting February 22nd for the purpose of the search. So your next meeting would be when we present the leadership profile, which is where we also describe to you the characteristics that you're looking for based on the summary of all that input that we gathered. So, I'm assuming people will be here for the board meeting. That's not as critical probably as those being here for the interviews. So the board interview workshop and seminar is on March 22nd. That's the same night we present the slate to you of the 5 or 6 candidates. And then you'll see the next week almost as the board interviews. And for some reason I skipped the next week, it looks like, or I went to the weekend actually. So your board meetings are on Tuesday. But
Yeah, so and that's the first kind of red flag date I noticed, because that's the Friday and Saturday at the end of the spring break, and obviously
Okay.
the day before Easter.
Right.
So I don't know how, folks feel about that, but that, just on an initial glance, doesn't seem to be the best date.
No, that's fine. That's why we've got it out there to talk about. We can maybe go the week before, move it back earlier than later, just so we can keep on the 19th as the announcement date.
Well, I'm not opposed to meeting or conducting business here during spring break.
Right.
I have no intention of being gone, but I don't know, if any of the other board members already have plans to be gone that week. And the accountant types, yeah.
Yeah.
Do something on April 14th.
Yeah, do something on April 14th, right?
Well, you said you want to move it up, but if you move it up, it's that 1 week, it's kind of the same problem because of the beginning of the spring break. So
Right.
it is what it is. If we're around, we're around. So.
Well, if we go back a week, though, we are looking at the week of the 23rd. Well, the week, I'm talking about probably the 19th or 20th, could go earlier in the week. It doesn't have to be a Thursday, it doesn't have to be a Friday, Saturday. It typically is a Friday, Saturday, because Saturday is a long day. You can get in 4 interviews, plus a debriefing session Saturday afternoon when you're done. So it's easier, but it could be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
If you're okay with leaving these dates at the end of spring break, I'm okay with that. If anybody has any concerns, I think what we can say, we can move it all back a week. And so the target for public announcement is the end of April, the 26th, as opposed to the 19th. I don't consider that anything egregiously worse than the 19th, or any better, so.
No, I don't have a problem. I think they just hit the 19th.
Yeah. No, it doesn't have to work that way, right. Are you okay if we just, let's stick with this, and we know we have some float at the end of the schedule, that if we have to move things out a week or so?
A different spring break. So not an issue.
Well, when is theirs?
Middle of March.
Middle of March, so it's
second week.
earlier in the
Yeah.
process?
National champs. That's what
Roll
I
Tide,
want.
Kevin.
Roll Tide.
The only thing I would want to bring up with that is if you are going to do any of these focus groups as part of those days, it's going to be really hard to get staff and to get other people during spring break. So I don't know if that would fall on one of those same days or not, but do be aware of that a lot of people are gone during spring break, and that could be a problem,
Yeah,
even if the
and
board's
so
there.
and those would occur those days, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that-
Well, time out. That wouldn't occur, John, until the April 2nd and 6th.
Okay.
The final
Yeah, then
three
you'd be
people.
fine. Yeah, then you'd be
Yeah.
fine.
Thank you. the final three people, those semifinalists, are usually three, and that would be April 2 to 6, somewhere in that time frame, and then the forms would be with that night with those interviews before they see the board members. Great thought. So are we leaving the 30th and 31st for now?
For now. yeah.
Okay. And then, so that's typically 5 interviews those 2 days, 2 on Friday night, and then 3 on Saturday with a debriefing at the end. So you'll notice on there that the board meets to identify semifinalists. That's at the end of the interviews on the Saturday. And then what we do, we come in and talk about, you saw 5 people or 6 people, what'd you think? Now, we may have to go back to a Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday interview if we have 6 or 7 candidates. If you can't start until 7 o'clock at night, it might have to be 3 nights.
Right.
That happens too, depending on your schedules and so on. Then the final 3 candidates, typically 3, could be 4, could be 2, would be April 2nd through 6th, some 2 nights that week. Typically, those are, again, the forums could happen at night, then the board interviews. Typically, those are interviews where you're going for a little longer time. There's a board dinner with a candidate and their partner, and then the partner is excused, and you have another hour and a half or 2 hours with the candidate, going deeper on questions that you had from the first interview or feedback from the forums that you had or other kinds of feedback you've gotten on the candidates from reference checks or whatever. And then following that, this would be a separate meeting. The board would identify their preferred candidate. I put that down for April 7th, meaning that I think that's hard to do the night after you had an all evening with a candidate, to say, okay, tonight we're going to review 3 candidates. We just got done with John. We're going to review the other 2 and make a decision. It's 11 o'clock tonight. So let's be fresh on that day. I think that's a Saturday, probably Saturday morning. Or maybe it has to be, I don't know what day of the 7th. I've forgotten what day of the week that is. Is that Saturday?
Yep.
So it can be a fairly early that day. It can be a 15-minute meeting. It can be a 3-hour meeting. Depends on, so typically Saturdays work better depending on the candidate pool and the strength of the candidates and how much we're together on the final decision. You're together.
Ideally, we have an idea of the semifinalist interviews early in that week, because then Thursday the 5th, we have our committee of the whole meeting and we're together anyway. Might be a good opportunity to
Yep, you can do it that way.
then identify that preferred candidate. So we might gain a couple of days there.
So that's the 5th. So yeah, if you had meetings on, well, you'd have to have probably 2, 3, and 4,
Right.
for example, and then the decision would be made on the 5th then. That would be, yeah.
Maybe aggressive for the week, but
No,
if
no.
we can make that work, I think it would probably work out better for the rest of the board.
That's if you keep that Easter weekend, right,
Right.
intact.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, it moves it all down.
Any concerns there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do.
The week of, the last week of March, or the last week and the first week?
No, just that weekend, that whole Easter weekend.
Yeah.
That's a rough one.
Okay. All right, well, okay, so there is a good potential that March 30th and on gets moved a week. So even though we might want to stay aggressive to that, we might have to move it.
Well, and the key is, as long as folks are kind of here that April, first part of April, if you're not, out of the country or you can't be at a meeting, that's where we run into trouble, where a couple of people are traveling worldwide and they're not in town at all.
Right.
And the time schedule is 9 or 12 hours difference or something.
Yeah.
So as long as people are relatively around, we're certainly flexible on our end. We just want to know early enough that we can tell candidates, be available these
Right.
dates, because we're not sure what's happening, but we know these are the board final interviews. But we can certainly, I'll make a note here that we're going to look harder at that March 30, 31, which could
Yeah, I'm
affect-
just thinking with Easter being kind of a family holiday, people
Yeah.
might have out-of-towners in town, and it makes it doubly difficult to get away
Yep.
to do this.
Well, again, we're on a, being done by middle of April, toward the end of April, I think you're okay. That you run into, people trying to notify their current board. So I was factoring that into the calendar a little bit, that people want to be notified. And so now you're notifying them by May 1. We could run into an interim situation. And so that's all kind of swirling in my head, depending on this calendar. So was why I was trying to be a little aggressive. And that's why I say, too, if timeline's a concern, we could drop some of these things and shrink some of this stuff a little bit and get done before April 1st, but that's really moving pretty fast.
Yeah, my gut
Yeah.
my gut feel is that that's not going to happen. I don't know if I'd be interested in trying to do that, because I just don't think it'll be possible. But I think as we go along, it'll indicate how possible that is.
Yeah, and certainly some things take care of themselves. If somebody's, most contracts are being a lot more fluid than they used to be, so flexibility is much like you've experienced here with your February timeframe with John. I mean, people are experiencing that all the time. They made other adjustments, so there's a lot more the dynamic nature of those release times than there used to be.
Right, and the board meeting to identify preferred candidate and the amount of time for the conducting site visit, there might be opportunity to condense that time as well. So even though we may be running late there, we may still be able to hit the August 19th target, so.
Yeah, I think it works out. I mean, once
April,
you
thank
get
you.
your candidate, it'll be.
Not August, thank you.
So the other one is the target public announcement, 19th or 26th, it sounds like, is kind of what we're thinking about, and depending on how we adjust the calendar as we go through the search process.
Yeah. I don't know how the rest of the board feels about it, but I guess my expectation all along was an April timeframe.
Okay.
If March would have happened, I think that would have been kind of, the best case scenario. And, the fact that we're considering out-of-state candidates in that, I just didn't see how March would be possible. But I think May would be way too late. So I think April is right on target.
Well, there's the thing that you consider, and what depends, again, if the time frame, and I want this on the table just so you have the consideration, because I know it's a concern. We can do less of the community engagement and talk to staff here, the internal people, maybe one group of parents, and just fast track that, give you a much shorter report on what we heard and the characteristics, and get that all shrunk down faster. Well, you lose then maybe a few hundred people that would be involved in the process as you do that, to go faster. So you go faster, you lose people. You just can't get everybody together, then we have to write a report. We've met more people, so it takes longer to pull the notes together, to write the report for you. And so there's a time chunk in there driven by a significant amount of community engagement, which is what we value as a company, certainly. And we think we're pretty good at that. We think it's valuable to the board in transition. We think you'll hear things that you may not have thought about as 7 board members, and that's important. We think the new person, whoever it is, gets started because there was support from the community for this thing to happen, because you heard from the community what was important to them, that was factored into the search process. And so for a lot of reasons, community engagement is very important, but if we're concerned about the time frame at all, that's where the time can be shrunk. I don't know that we can go faster on recruiting. It takes a good few weeks for things to get around.
I think that would be the one area we'd be least interested in condensing.
Yeah,
you know.
okay. Well, let's shoot for the 19th, it sounds like, and we'll just do what we can do, and if other things become apparent, we can certainly adjust. And again, we're flexible. We have enough people involved with Pat helping us from Wisconsin, that if somebody here isn't going to be here, we plug Pat in. She's been on the calls with us already about this. So she knows our schedule. We've talked in general with her. She's has her own ideas about potential candidates, so she's out working the field for us, so she's out there in virtual associate space. Other questions about the calendar we didn't talk about, or these items that you want to go deeper into, what do they mean tonight? Again, the handbooks we have, the technical explanation we have online here explains some of these processes.
Yeah. 2 comments, or 1 comment, 1 question. So thank you for throwing some initial dates down there. I think that was extremely helpful. I think if we would have gone into this exercise and started building dates, it probably would have been a lot more difficult activity. So thank you for marking that. The second thing is, and assuming the superintendent or the superintendent assuming responsibilities on July 1st. Is there precedence for the superintendent, getting involved before July 1st?
Oh, sure. Transition, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, we try to encourage that. It just kind of, when, it depends on the circumstances. If somebody's next door and you go back and forth, use vacation time, for example, absolutely get involved before that.
Okay.
That's very valuable. And if you have internal candidates, obviously they're here, part of the planning, so that's easy for them. So if they're from out of state, there's, technology and video conferencing and other ways to be involved. People fly in, for a week.
How is that period generally compensated? Because usually they're under contract from July 1st to May 31st. Is there usually like a per diem agreement
some kind of
in
a
that
per
kind of case?
Right.
Well, I can tell you how I was compensated when I came here.
Oh, you did this? Do tell.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It wasn't.
But I came up and I did exactly that. I took some vacation days in Dunlap, and I came up here and spent some days, and I got to meet with all the administrators before I started, and that helped me get a kind of a running start. So I just think that has to be worked out.
Yeah, and most people
Right.
are sort of where John was at, where you just do it. But depends on the circumstance again and what's happening, and particularly if you want them here for 10 or 15 or 20 days. As, if we have that kind of time, then there might be some pay for half of them or something like that. There's arrangements are pretty flexible depending on what's being accomplished. But most of the professionals we run into, they're just going to do it. They have the vacation time. They want to get off to a good start, meet the staff, and so on.
Yep. Okay.
Great question. Other questions about the timeline or we would?
Yeah, could I ask, is there really value in the site visit? I went through it when I came here, and I mean, I guess it's usually done after there is a single candidate selected, right?
Right.
I mean, do you ever have a site visit where there's a candidate selected and they come back and go, no, we don't want that person? Or is it just seemed to me like when they did it on me, it was kind of like jumping through the hoops, and I don't know. Yeah, is there really value in it, or is it something you do to show the community that there was extra due diligence done?
I know you have opinions about this.
Well, I had a site visit when I was in Decatur, and it helped with the board members that were kind of on the fence, and that helped them. It also is more of a due diligence to share with the community that you did everything you can to double check to make sure that this is the right person for the community. So I understand where you're coming from, John. You can go either way on it. But it does help those board members that are kind of on the fence. But then it's a full day. There's no question about it, or maybe 2 full days. So
I would agree. I've been involved in both situations where there was a site visit and where there was not. I think that sometimes it provides some confirmation that this is the person that we want, and this is how other people who are in the district who are working with them feel about that particular candidate. So there can be some value with it, but it's not always necessary.
Certainly some of them are meetings where the superintendent you're going to hire potentially has set up the groups for the activities. So there's kind of people that he or she knows coming to the meeting, so you have references basically, so it's pretty positive. But you get a spirit of what is the spirit of a place like that? What do you see around? What's the focus? What do people talk about? How do they interact with each other? Is it stiff? Is it cordial? Is it more formal? I mean, you get some nonverbal stuff. I think what Connie and Ken have said, though, the confirmation is helpful. I've done it. I've not done it. It's probably about 50-50. Not required. And usually it's only a couple board members, not the whole board.
Anyone have any questions about that, or? Good.
So that takes us, I think, toward the end of what we wanted to talk about tonight. I think we've made tried to design the project around what you were hoping to get done. I hope if there are things we haven't talked about, or things you want to know more about, or things that you thought was going to be included in the search process that we didn't talk about, please say so. Our numbers, again, are on the front page, so call us. We will be emailing all of you together, basically. So when we write the notes up for this, we'll send out the 7 emails plus Julie about the dates and so on, and then we'll talk to Julie and John about these community meetings. I don't know if we want to do the 29th and 30th or the 30th and 31st. Does it make a difference? I put down 3 dates. I have a little bit of a choice. Does it matter which 3 dates we're using, or 2 dates rather? Okay.
No, she can call in.
Right, right.
Right.
And you don't, and the board members don't need to be here for our community engagement sessions. You don't need to introduce us. As long as we have a room and a time and we're bringing people in and a restroom, we're good to go. We introduce ourselves. We explain the process to people, what we're doing here. We don't need John or Julie or any of the board members to introduce us. We're just going to go do it. So whether we're here at the village hall or the church or wherever we're going to be, we're pretty self-sufficient for that. So you're not scheduled except for your individual meeting with us. And that can, again, be over the phone, depending on your schedule. So we shoot for the 29th and 30th, and the 31st is like our flex day if we need it, for things we couldn't get done,
Yeah, I think that's fair.
okay?
I'd
So we'll
keep
shoot
all
for those
3.
2 days.
I'd just keep all 3 and be done.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely keep all 3, but if they can be condensed into 2.
Yeah, we'll try to schedule with Julie and others those 2 days, and then third day. So what that means is we'll likely have a community forum the night of the 29th and the night of the 30th for those people we miss. So we usually have 2 community forums, particularly the size of your district. And so those aren't down here separate, but those are typically part of those days. And those are, again, at 6 o'clock, 6:30, someplace like this, or another community building someplace that you identified. Could maybe 2 different places, one here, one someplace else in the district that's maybe like the Senior Citizen Center, so it could be, we're flexible about where we hold the meetings too, depending on what's best for you guys in terms of gathering input. Any questions we didn't cover?
You're still
Anything-
under contract. Do you want to be involved?
No, they won't want, you won't want any of us, right? You're like-
No, we'll introduce ourselves. We just show up and, we don't need the introduction.
No, but if it happened February 1st, you're just a community member and you could be involved.
Right, I would come to the meeting.
It'd be good. We usually the outgoing superintendent's our driver, and he typically drives us around and buys dinner for us. So if we could get that done, that would be a great advantage for our search process.
Okay.
Anything we haven't designed for our process or things we haven't talked about? Julie, any questions you have?
Question for the board. Do we want something on the website to kind of focus solely on our website, to focus solely on the superintendent search and maybe include this timeline to set expectations?
I think you should.
Yeah, I think once it's solidified, I think just, and that's something I think to really bring Dan in the loop on this.
Right.
Because I think for the public to always be able to go and know this is where we are in the process will be a good transparency.
Right, because,
Yeah.
at some point,
Yeah, and
I
it could
think
be
it would be
a
good for the.
tab on the homepage that takes it just
Right,
to
it
a
would be
dedicated.
Yep.
good for a press release or a board notification saying, for information on the search, go to this part of the
Right.
website, and it'll keep you up to date on things.
Great.
All right, any other questions, any comments?
I have one question, and this may not be something that you folks deal with. Given this timeline and the desire to have that person named at the end of April, is there enough time to deal with the contractual requirements and still have that person in place by July 1?
It's going to depend on who it is. I mean, what their obligations are with their notifications. Again, potentially, if it's somebody from out of state and there's discussion, usually you can get out of the contract, but it may not be able to start until September 1st.
Are you concerned that 2.5 months is possibly too tight of a window for a
I
contract?
don't know, right? None of us really know. But making sure that we have that back and forth going, yes, I want this in my contract, no, we can't give this in the contract. I can't imagine it'll be a problem, but I want to make sure that we have that
Having
time.
finality and a timeline for both parties to a contract, I think helps bring the contract to closure. If you allow more time, you're going to fill that void with contract negotiations. So
Okay.
I think if you shorten it and you say this is when it needs to be done, both sides have an incentive to get it done.
Okay, fair enough.
thanks for the time tonight. Again, thanks for the opportunity to work with you and the board and help you with this process. We're excited about it. I think you'll have some great candidates and look forward to a high-quality search and some really qualified candidates down the road as we get closer to that time frame.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, we'll move on to item number 7. I'll make a motion to go into closed session for the items listed on the agenda at 7:38 PM.
Second.
We have a motion and a second from Mr. Troy. Can I have roll call?
Mrs. Melendi? Yes. Mr. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Drizel?
Yes.
Mr. Guerin?
Yes.
Mr. Troy?
Yes.
Mr. Fleck?
Yes.
Mr. Quagliano?
Yes.
All right, we are in closed session. No. I think the one thing you might have known from the little time you've known me is